I wanted to ask you a question though, and we were talking about it last night actually. The idea of selling out, and I feel that I've never heard another culture use that term. I've like, and I could be wrong, and hopefully people will comment like, no, Darnell, you're wrong. These people use it in this area. And it could be because most of the people that I'm around are black or whatever, but I've never heard other, like, is the idea of selling out something that idea, is that exclusive to black people?
I don't know. But I think it was an interesting point that you mentioned, because I haven't heard because going back to your Chinese store example, right? Like your Chinese restaurant example, like in the Asian community, it's not a thing that you hear, like, why are you building all of these Chinese restaurants in other communities outside of your own? And I don't know, I've heard, that that's not traditional type of food that they would eat themselves. Like you would go, there's different types of Chinese restaurants when you go into Chinese neighborhoods. I used to live in one. You wouldn't find the Chinese shop that you find in the hood. That's not the kind of Chinese restaurant you find like traditional. So for them, that's not something they're thinking about, like, oh, why are you operating over there? They understand the value of having business. Like, I think a lot of other cultures understand the value of business, because they come here, when you come here as an immigrant, and that's one of the first things that you're able to do here. Opening a business, you have to figure out how to make the most money possible. You're going to figure out what markets work the best. A lot of people go into the same industries that have been paved by immigrants before them, and they make that work. I feel like with us, we're still trying to figure it out. So when it comes to what type of businesses we're doing and what we're offering, I feel like we're very targeted. Like, I think we're very targeted in terms of we should have more diversity in what we offer, and we should be able to grow. We should be able to do different things. And I feel like sometimes culturally it feels like, or like the lashes and the hair brands and all these other things. That's another thing that I see a lot of. I just feel like we should be able to grow beyond that and create that. And I think that we're not necessarily there yet. And that's part of, for me, I think the problem in terms of us reaching generational wealth. Yeah, you can have a wealthy hair care brand, et cetera, but like, there's a lot of untapped markets that we have not gotten into yet that we should really be focusing on, and we should really be driving people to explore.
But I agree. I think the issue is there's a knowledge gap, right? And that's part of the reason why we exist. A lot of people, hopefully people will see like long term that the business vision for what we're trying to do is much bigger. And one day they'll look back and be like, wow, hopefully. But there's a knowledge gap with a lot of stuff. Even with Do You Know Black, we're fortunate, right? Like we have Darnell, right, who has this wealth of knowledge, a bunch of information, a huge network, and he's able to bridge a knowledge gap for us. We have an understanding of like corporate to a degree, right? For our backgrounds, whether it's in marketing, talent acquisition, diversity. So we're able to take some event production. We're able to take some of those experiences and knowledge and then combine that with like Darnell's knowledge, and then combine that with like just sharing information across the board. But it took us years. I'm 35, about to be 36 now. We're just getting started. And it's going to take a while before we're even profitable. But because of certain decisions that we made in life, we're able to give ourselves an opportunity to be able to be uncomfortable. So this process of creating something unique and innovating, the startup cost is immense. Then there's the marketing cost is immense. Then there's the production and sustaining is immense. The cost of customer acquisition. It's not easy to be an entrepreneur. That's something that Nick spoke about. Not every, like, we push people like, oh, go and be an entrepreneur. Like it's completely okay to have a 9-to-5 that pays you very well, that you can buy a house and then figure out how to get that house and turn it into another house and all that stuff. Even though that's a completely different discussion. But in any event, I mean, I do think that that's the big reason why we're not going as broad in terms of what we offer, is because there's a huge knowledge gap and there's a financial gap to starting things up. So for me, I think a big gap that we do have is this cross-cultural mindset, where it's not necessarily about being for us, by us anymore. I think it should be by us, about us, but for everybody. And that's not saying we forget us. It's saying that for everybody, because now if you get to the point where you can have everybody's dollars coming into our community, and then we figure out how, now that we have exponentially 20 times more money coming into our community, now we can circulate those dollars within our community, and then now we have the funds to be able to start doing more innovative stuff. So this is what I was saying before, when we start talking about we have to think bigger picture, right?
That's what when you said that, that's what it reminded me of, the whole idea with Black. Like, it's not about it's for us, by us. It's literally, it's for us, about us, but to be consumed by everyone. Like, I think that
it's by us, about us, for everybody.
Whatever. Okay. Whatever. I think it's important to distinguish that, because especially as it relates to our own brand, because we've kind of experienced that too, where people feel like we're excluding other groups by saying, like, we got like a couple of comments early on from, white people about what is like, they didn't even know what it was. Like, the show hadn't even come out yet. We had trailers up, they hadn't seen it, but they heard the title, they saw the title, and we were getting all of this hate, these hate comments and stuff on our page about Black. And at the end of the day, the whole purpose of it, and I think that any Black brand, which goes back to the point that I said before, where we should be thinking mindfully about how we are reaching when we launch a brand, even if it's specifically for us. In the beginning, we should always have an idea of how is this going to branch out. It's not about, we need to bring in other people. We need to make this acceptable for white people or Hispanics or whatever. It's not about that. It's about, how is my brand going to be reachable to the widest audience possible? Because at the end of the day, it's just what you said. It's by us, and for everybody, right? And I think that that's important to distinguish, because I feel like we really kind of cut our own cords a little short, when we do things like that, when we're like, oh, well, we got it. Like, we'll literally say, and I don't think that any other group does this, and they complain when we do this, where they're like, oh, we don't have this thing is called Black Girl Sunscreen. Well, what about everybody else? This is Black blah blah blah, like, what about everybody else? And I'm like, I don't care about all that. I'm like, they don't understand the purpose of why we've created that, because we didn't have one to exist before that. That's why we're calling this that. This is why we have this, whatever. But ultimately, I do feel like we should be thinking way more universally, way more broadly about how our products, even when they're made for us, how they okay. And I'm sorry to like cut this off quickly, because I worked in the disability space for a while, and this came up too in the same sense, the idea of universal design. And people never consider people with disabilities. I forget, there was this girl I was talking to one time, and she was blind, and she was saying, we were having this conversation, and she was talking about the idea of like lights, and how for us it's like nothing, like you just go in, you flip on a light, and like for them, who they don't see anyway. And like, we were talking about the idea of universal design, and how we made it seem like such a big deal to create things that everyone can use, right? Like, if we're all benefiting from it, what does it matter, right? Like, this one girl who was in a wheelchair, and she was saying she had to have accommodations to get a push button put in for their glass doors, because she couldn't get in to her office every day. And then you would see as soon as she was the one who literally had to fight to get this thing put in. And then as soon as she got it put in, you see like people coming in with coffee cups and they're like pushing the button, trying to get in. They're like using it. People who have like bags in their hand, their book bags, like everybody's using it. But like nobody would fight for it. And nobody would fight for her to get this put in. But once it was in, they all realized they could use it. And I feel like it's the same thing how we should be thinking about our products, where I think there's always going to be an audience who's in between, who's able to use our products. And we should always be thinking universally, like universal design. Like, how is this going to benefit the most amount of people possible?
Yeah. I think, yes, we should always be thinking universal design. But at the end of the day, it's still about us. It just may not look the way that you want it to look, right? One of the things that I realized early on as an entrepreneur is I listen to everybody, but I don't take advice from everybody. So I'll hear what people have to say. I'll listen to what they have to say. I'll try to understand where they're coming from. But I got to the point where now, unless one, you have a level of expertise in a certain area, or two, you are invested in the business itself in a demonstrated way, then I can't take your advice. You either have to be invested or an expert, or I'll just listen to understand that, hey, there are people out there that might think this way. And I think that the hardest part that ends up happening a lot of times, and then we'll start to wrap up the conversation. I think it's very easy for people to have Twitter fingers, right? Like, meaning that as people, when you're an entrepreneur, there's so much that you have to do, especially when you're a Black entrepreneur. When we don't necessarily have any mentors, right, per se. I can say that I have a few advocates for me. I could say that I have a few sponsors, right? So I have people that will like cheer for me. I have people that will talk positively about me. I have people that if I ask very pointed questions, like resources, that they'll give me very pointed answers. But we don't have like mentors in this game. A lot of us don't have like somebody that can take us through it, and people who are maybe like sharp, willing, determined. We end up having to make a lot of mistakes on our own. So there's a lot that you have to overcome as a Black owned, as a Black entrepreneur. You have to overcome a huge knowledge gap. You have to do a lot by yourself. There's stats talking about how many Black owned businesses are operating independently. You lose sleep. You risk a certain amount of money that other people wouldn't be willing to risk, right? On doing something. A lot of people want to start a business, but they won't take the risk that's involved. There's a lot of money that we could have spent on the house, right? Like there's money that we could have spent on the roof or whatever it is, but it's like, no, like you start to make certain sacrifices when you're an entrepreneur. There's imposter syndrome that you have to overcome. You develop this thing and then you have to struggle with yourself to be like, well, why is mine so good? And you have to actually convince yourself that what you're doing is actually worth it. There's fear, there's sweat, there's just so many things emotionally, financially, physically that entrepreneurs go through that can literally be ruined, like where their intentions are pure. They just want to grow their business and make it sustainable and help build generational wealth and usually give back to the community, because Richard Ludennis, he ended up acquiring Essence, and there's a much bigger picture to this, right? Which I'm sure I would love to have a conversation with him, because I know that there's like, I can only imagine what he's thinking down the road, that people that are just, behind their phones tweeting something
that, because I know, I think it was Tamika who had mentioned that he had acquired Essence. It's beyond that though, because yes, he did acquire Essence and brought it back to Black ownership, but he also acquired the Villa Luaro, which we had a question about in the first season, Madam C.J. Walker's mansion, where other people don't know the background, but like she used to host civil rights meetings there, like really prominent leaders. It's a very significant space. And I think that it was his decision to acquire that space is a very significant, because he also said he was going to do workshops and things like that, helping other Black brands and entrepreneurs get off the ground there. Like, so him in the process of doing that, it was a very, not only thoughtful, but significant step in doing that. And I feel like it meant way more than just like, oh, he owns brands because he has some money. Like, he's making very intentional moves that I think are very important for people to keep in mind. But that's neither here nor there.
That's a great example. And it just shows that like people who are not invested in the process, it's very easy for us to just like, oh, let me take to social media and reshare this thing that's baseless, right? I don't want to cut you off, but we had talked about this before, and I want you to touch on this because we talked about the idea of the amount of damage, right? Like how long it takes for somebody to build a brand, and how quickly, especially as Black people and Black Twitter and all of these things, like how quickly we can damage that brand. And I wanted you to touch on that because I felt like that's a big piece. Well, you just touched on it, and that's a great point, because when you think about the time horizon, right? Being very meticulous, and I'm refraining from talking about our business practices in this specifically, because I'm sure at some point we will. But when you think about like how long it takes these people, the grind, how like the hours, like even myself, there was a period when it was like for months and months, I was going like 21-3. And you can attest to that. Like I was going 21-3, no sleep, just like literally figuring out how can I get 15 minutes, right? And then there's like, I don't want to make it about like us, but you know, in school for my MBA, there's the whole fitness thing, there's the business, then there's the day job because we still have to fund the business. So there's all these sacrifices, and that's just us, right? There's a bunch that you're doing, there's a bunch that I'm doing. Like you literally had to develop like 700 questions for like so much work that goes into this stuff. I think about all these other businesses, like there are people who are taking out money from their 401ks, taking a second mortgage out on their house, doing whatever, right? Like literally like living on peanut butter and jelly and Spam or whatever the struggle meals are. Like people are figuring this thing out, and over the course of years and years, and figuring out how to make it make sense. And then for just somebody to go to social media and just like deliver something that may be partially true in theory, or for people to start sharing a headline that isn't really founded on any legitimate information, and you can destroy your brand. Because now there's a few things that happen. Either one, that brand, like you may have sponsors that disassociate from them or whatever it is, because now it's like, oh, well, we don't want to associate with you anymore. Or that brand has to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions upon millions of dollars in marketing and PR to restore their image that was damaged by Black people doing it to ourselves, Black people doing it to other Black people that are trying to elevate themselves. And this is not like a Black on Black discussion, right? This is like Black for Black discussion. There's a huge difference. So this is like, we gotta be for us for real.
I think that the response, you know how I feel about cancel culture. Even back then, I was not a fan. But I think it goes back to the damage. And I think that's part of it. Like, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to be complicit in tearing down somebody when we don't know the full story. There's always multiple sides to one thing. And we all make mistakes. We see this all the time. When we're on Instagram and we see something that's not factual and you're like, oh my God. Like, and then it goes viral and there's like all these people that like this post. And I'm like, and especially if it's like a Black history one, because we know like that's not, the fact is skewed. That's not the actual fact, but like so many people run with it because of the caption and they're like, oh, this is amazing. And they like run off and they share it and it's not accurate. And I felt like that's what happened with this situation. So we can be our own worst enemy, which is a different conversation. But before I know that we wanted to wrap, I did want to touch on, before we did, the comment that Tyler, I think, had made about you have to decide whether you're doing it for the community or whether you're doing it for yourself. Because for me, I feel like that's not a question. Like, it should always be for yourself. You can do something with the community in mind, but unless you're a nonprofit, like unless you're launching your business as a nonprofit, no business should be launched with the idea of how can I do something for everybody else, like in mind. And I know I'm gonna get a ton of dislikes and people are gonna hate what I'm saying and all these other things about this, but the example
it's okay. I'll save you. I'll save
the
you.
example I would give is airlines, right? Like when you're on a plane, right? When they tell you specifically, when they're giving you the instruction, always put your mask on first before you try to help somebody else put theirs on. Like you cannot do both. You cannot sit there and you can't save yourself. You can't save somebody else before saving yourself, right? I think the same thing applies to brands, which is why I say you always have to be, not that you're not doing it with the community in mind, but you can't do something solely focused on this group and not yourself and your business, because your business is going to fail in that case. If you're doing something with other people in mind, you're going to fail. Because at the end of the day, like, you have to save yourself. And I think that people forget that, or they get upset about that, and they're like, oh, well, what about this? We talked about this too before, the idea of like people who start a brand new business and they start up and then they're like, oh, I'm launching a scholarship, or I'm gonna donate a certain amount of my proceeds of every sale to some other nonprofit. And these are all honorable, admirable things. But at the end of the day, is that business going to be sustainable? You haven't even launched yourself yet. You haven't even gotten to a point of profit. And now you're already designated a part of your profit to another business. And that's going to hurt your business in the long run. You have to get yourself out of the hole before you're in a position to be able to give to other people. And I think that and this isn't even a Black thing, this is just people in general. I think people think that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I'm supposed to, it's going to look much better for me to do this. And I don't think that's the case. I think especially as Black people, where our margins are lower, and this is proven, like our margins are lower, we're operating at a much higher risk rate. Like, we need to be focused on how can we maximize, how can we make the most amount of money possible, and how can we then divert that into development or research or whatever else we need to do to grow the brand. And we're taking these funds out when we're saying, like, we're going to launch these things that are going to go help the community. What will help the community is you getting off the ground, you getting to a certain point, and then being able to, just like any rapper, like any no-name rapper versus the top level rapper, like the top level rappers are the ones who are able to go back to the community and do these like turkey drives or toy drives or whatever they want to do, start these foundations. Like, they're in a position to do that, whereas somebody who comes out with one single, why would they do that? To me, I think it's the same equivalent.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I agree with everything you said. I think that but I don't disconnect those things. I don't put myself first, and I don't put the community first. I put myself as part of the community, right? Like, and what I am doing is a contribution to the overall community and the vitality. They say a rising tide carries all ships. Right. So
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the same thing.
I know you're saying the same thing, but you said the same thing, but you didn't say the same thing. That's why I was going to save you.
Stop.
No, listen. Because a rising tide carries all ships. They say, like, you can't. When this principle applies to every area of life. It applies to marriage. When people talk about, like, we don't have kids yet, but when we do, the goal, we should be focusing on ourselves first. Because if our relationship is severed and broken, then we're not going to be the best parents that we could possibly be. That's what most married parents have told me. Like, take care of your relationship, and the kid is going to grow up in a healthy household, right? They talk about it when it talks about eating, right? If you can't feed somebody if you're about to if you're going to starve. If you're on a plane and you can't help somebody else, with their oxygen if you don't. So I agree with all of that. But words matter. So I think that, like, the way that you said it, we have to remember that it's not about putting me first. There are luxuries that we as a people don't have, unfortunately. Not just from a bit, our margins aren't low just on business. Our margins as people are low on life. It's like the fourth quarter and we are down by a lot. We cannot miss any shots, right? Like we need to run the perfect game from now moving forward as a people. So there are certain luxuries that we don't have. We don't have the luxury of internalizing the emotions the way that a lot of other cultures do. We don't have the luxury of not being as informed as other people. Like we don't have the luxury to not have a masterful understanding of these things. And the reason that all this is tied back to what you're saying is that when I'm building a business for myself, I understand that at the end of the day, it is still about Black. I have to go a greater length to understand and build strategy around how does my existence as a Black person impact, and my time on earth as a Black person, how does that impact the Black community? And how can I develop efficiencies between my existence, my actions, and the progression of the Black community? So I don't want to separate them as me first, them first. We have to move together very strategically. And the problem that happens now is we're so disjointed that you have Twitter fingers, you have headline culture, you have people that are have big opinions without big information. And then we lose this entire strategy that makes us end up like, we're running super fast. Oh, dang, I have to stop and slow down. And then I have to like explain to them what's going on. So I agree. I just wanted to tighten it up to because I know what you were talking about. The last thing that I did want to talk about is, and then we can wrap, is Lamont had responded to, because he had asked them, basically they had implied, he had asked who is doing it well, like basically cross-cultural marketing, multicultural marketing, who is doing it well, who has expanded their brands well. And Nick and Tamika, they brought up examples of commercials that like Beats by Dre and their commercials and like how they've remained Black. And Lamont pushed back and he said that like commercials are a small portion of a business's bottom line and how they operate. So I did want to touch on that before we wrap, because I feel that when we put such a big emphasis on commercials and ads and strategic communications, it's very easy to allow white people to pander to us. I remember growing up and I would go to church, and whenever it was election season, we're Haitian. I walk into the church and there would be these white people sitting in the front of the church, and we already knew what time it was. We already knew that they were going to get up on the stage and pander to the whole church community, talking about like, oh, sac passe, and then the whole church would laugh and, just entertain this person. But it's like, where were you at the barbecue? Where were you at the church anniversary? Where were you at these different events? Where were you at the important funeral? You were nowhere to be found, but you had enough time to pander to us. We have to not saying that creative campaigns and marketing and these heartwarming stories aren't good, but those things can be literally done from behind a computer. We cannot allow people to acquire our loyalty and acquire our advocacy from work that they can do behind a computer. We can't do that anymore. We cannot allow them to pander to us. So I'm really happy that Lamont brought that up, talking about hiring practices and all of those things. But at the same time, we shouldn't just let a campaign made that was a mistake or an accident or a misstep. We can't let that deter us as well. We really have to look at the overall work. So I'll let you get your final thoughts on that, and then we can wrap.
And I think that's why I'm so hard on us overall, because I want us to elevate our mindset, like beyond that. It's not about whether you can't question my my love for my culture. Like I love being Black. I love Black people, but I feel like there are things that we've been doing for too long, or things that have kind of just been a community trend for too long, that we just need to get past. And to me, I feel like, going back to that pandering example, that's one of those things where we just need to stop allowing small things to it's not even satisfy, it's not even the word, but I feel like we're appeased by small things like that, but we're also very irritated by other things that would not necessarily be a deal breaker for other people. And I feel like we just need to rebalance our priorities and what's important to us, what's worth arguing over, like all of these things. I think that we need to reevaluate as a culture.
The cost of our attention, you know, they say you better pay attention. People don't pay enough for our attention. We need to, as a people, we need to make the cost of our attention much higher than what it is. And the cost of our attention cannot be the algorithm. The cost of our attention cannot be a creative campaign or a missed campaign or like a really heartwarming story that anybody could have literally written up and ideated in a boardroom on a Zoom call and presented it to a board of people that probably don't look like you. And then they said, wow, that's really heartwarming. All of the metrics say that this will get a lot of clicks, a lot of impressions, a lot of likes, a lot of shares. So this campaign will be a great success. And then guess what? Is your community any better for it? Absolutely not. But some white person probably got a really good bonus for it though, because you clicked like and you shared it. So
it's a good way to end it.
That's what we'll do.
Good way to wrap up the episode. So,
well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time out to watch the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. Our goal with this is just to be completely transparent, completely honest, and just figure out how we can keep the conversation going. Sometimes you're going to agree with what we say. Sometimes you're not going to agree with what we say. It's okay as long as we keep the conversation going, and that's what's most important. Once again, I'm Darnell.
And I'm Alyssa.
And this has been the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. Peace.
See you next time.